Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in extraordinary session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors in the gallery please stand and remain standing through the Pledge of Allegiance? Representative Hicks of Washington will serve as chaplain of the day. Representative Hicks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, do you ever feel stuck? Do you ever feel like you're caught between a rock and a hard place? Stuck in a job you hate, stuck in an environment you can't change, stuck with a problem you just can't seem to solve, or stuck with an addiction that you can't seem to overcome. Sometimes our greatest problems in life is finding a way to move forward when we are stuck and unable to change. Do you ever feel stuck? The man near the pool of Bethesda didn't use the word stuck, but he could have. For 38 years, he had been stuck, frozen in a place, just him and a mat. He's absolutely comfortable with the excuses that he makes. But Jesus will ask him a question that will cut through all of the excuses. It may be the same question that some of us need to answer this morning. Do you want to get well? We aren't told this man's name. 38 years on a 2x4 mat. His entire world for 38 years was 8 square feet. Waiting, watching, hoping. He is convinced that his only hope is over there in that magic pool of water. He is stuck. He is living an as soon as life. As soon as I get into the water, my problems will be fixed. But here's the thing. The pool of Bethesda is an illusion. It tricks us into living an as soon as life. You must know what that is like. We say, as soon as I graduate, get a job, get a better job. As soon as I have more time, more money, a better house. As soon as he changes the way he acts. As soon as she apologizes. You can fill in the blanks with almost anything. The problem is there will always be another pool of Bethesda. Meanwhile, our lives have been put on hold. Jesus didn't need a pool of water. He simply said, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And once the man was cured. This story isn't about an invalid in Jerusalem. This story is about you. It's about me. The fella isn't nameless. He has a name, and it's yours. Let's pray. Father, help us not to look for things like a pool of water for our comfort and our healing. Help us to look only towards you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Representative Hicks will lead us in Pledge of Allegiance.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 93 members present.
Let the journal reflect that Representatives Cooper, Crawford, Sexton, Granger, Alexander, Harris are excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring.
Welcome and honor anyone seeking recognition. Representative Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, as most of you know, we're not normally here at this time of year. This gives me the opportunity to wish my number one daughter, the apple of my eye, a happy birthday. Please, let's make her feel that she's enjoying it. Thank you.
Representative Carringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After consultation with both leaders, I move that all members of the Knox County delegation voting in the affirmative be added as co-sponsors on HJR 15, which is to recognize Coach Rob Black from Fulton High School on his 100th win in Knox County.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On today's consent calendar, there is a resolution honoring the life of Father Fred Detweiler. Father Detweiler actually served as the chaplain of the day down here. I believe it was last year. He was a great man, will be deeply missed. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further recognition? Representative Manis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also on today's consent calendar, House Joint Resolution 9019 is recognizing the passing of Sarah Stowers. And I would like for members voting the affirmative to be added as co-sponsors with priority given to the Knox County delegation.
Anyone under welcoming and honoring? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of resolutions.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions properly filed be introduced pursuant to Rule number 17 and placed on the consent calendar, refer to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory and memorializing.
Next order, Mr. Clerk. I'm sorry. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory and memorializing lying on the desk be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions lying over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bill 82 be introduced and passed on first consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on first consideration, Senate bills on second consideration, House bills on second consideration.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bill 81 be passed on second consideration and be held on the desk, referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Petitions and memorials, reports from standing committees, reports from select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has a consent calendar.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of the consent calendar on third and final consideration in keeping with Rule 50.
Gentleman moves passage of the consent calendar, properly second. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, item 3, House Joint Resolution 16 has been objected to by Representative Freeman.
Anyone seeking recognition on the consent calendar? Representative Manis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. I was out of order earlier. In consultation with both leaders, I would like to move that all members voting in the affirmative on House Joint Resolution 9019, which recognizes the passing of Sarah Stowers, be added as co-sponsors with priority given to the Knox County delegation.
With objection, exclusions duly noted. Thank you. Representative Carringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize for being out of order, but I'm really excited that I got a second chance to say that I feel like the District of Champions 95 and being able to ask that all Knox County delegation with affirmative be added to co-sponsor HJR 15 and recognizing Coach Rob Black of Fulton High School in Knoxville with his 100th win for the Fulton Falcons. So thank you.
Thank you. Exclusions duly noted. Without objection, so ordered. Anyone else seeking recognition on the consent calendar? We're voting on the consent calendar. All members favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 91, no nays, 2 present, non voting.
Having received a constitutional majority, I declare consent calendar passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a regular calendar.
Mr. Clerk, call up first bill, please.
House Joint Resolution 7 by Chairman Reedy and others, a resolution to honor those individuals who came to the aid of their fellow citizens during the Waverly flood.
Chairman Reedy, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In consultation with both leaders of the House, Mr. Speaker, I request that all members voting in the affirmative shall be added as a prime co-sponsor of House Joint Resolution 7.
Exclusion duly noted without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of House Joint Resolution 7.
Chairman Reedy moves adoption. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Reedy, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we have the clerk read the resolution, please?
Mr. Clerk.
House Joint Resolution 7 by Representative Reedy and others, a resolution to honor those individuals who came to the aid of their fellow citizens during the Waverly flood. Whereas on August 21st, 2021, one of the deadliest floods ever to hit Tennessee devastated the city of Waverly and portions of the surrounding area. And whereas on that fateful day, the water rose rapidly across Humphreys, Dixon, Hickman, and Houston counties as torrential rains fell, with Humphreys County receiving an historic 17.06 inches of rain. And whereas the city of Waverly suffered catastrophic flooding, with vast swaths of the community washed away in the flood waters, and 20 individuals lost their lives due to the rampaging water that reached an unprecedented level. And whereas without hesitation or concern for their own safety, individual citizens quickly stepped up and joined with area first responders and emergency personnel to help their fellow Tennesseans in distress, selflessly making countless heroic efforts to rescue their neighbors from the flood waters. And whereas the good people of Waverly and the surrounding area begin to recover from this catastrophic catastrophe and rebuild their homes and their lives, they are filled with gratitude for the many who risked their lives to prevent further damage and to save the lives of those in danger. And whereas they are also grateful for and overwhelmed by the humanitarian efforts of the many businesses, charitable and civic organizations, churches, government agencies, and individuals who responded promptly and gave generously to their resources to help the good people of Waverly in their time of dire need. And whereas it has been said that the human race is at its best when circumstances are at their worst, this adage is proven by the generous and compassionate manner in which the citizens of this great state and nation open their hearts to the people of Waverly with emergency and medical assistance, moral and financial support, and most importantly, love and understanding during the recent flood disaster in Waverly. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that we commend and offer our appreciation and most sincere thanks to all the first responders, firefighters, healthcare personnel, law enforcement officers, missionary groups and churches, animal rescue groups, local, state, and federal agencies in the district, and corporations, individual business organizations, and agencies who provided professional assistance or humanitarian aid to the citizens of Waverly during the recent flood that raged through the community and the surrounding area. We extend our deepest appreciation to those heroic everyday Tennesseans who in a moment of great peril came to the aid and rescue of their neighbors and friends without hesitation. It is these unsung heroes who comprise the very heart of the volunteer state.
Chairman Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for reading that. Mr. Speaker, there are members here in the House who have been to Waverly that may want to speak on this resolution. And with that, if I could yield to Chairman Littleton.
Chairlady Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't live in Humphreys County now. I don't represent it, but I was raised there. So the devastation that came into Humphreys County, there are no words to describe it. But the devastation that is still there after months of the flood, there's still no words to describe the devastation that is there. But most of all, it's the people that came out to help and are still helping. So Humphreys County will suffer for years because they have to build new schools, they have to build new homes. And I have friends that still have not been able, because of their affection, their feelings, they still have not been able to pull down their homes. They still go sit on the porch and think, my house is still here, but I cannot live in it. So we're just thankful that we weren't touched by it, but they are still living that horror that came through in that flood. So let's keep them in our prayers, and the people that came to help. There's just no words for that either, because they came from all over the United States. But the surrounding counties were just amazing, and they're still amazing. So we have good people. Tennessee is a great state, and the whole United States did help, but Tennessee is the volunteer state. So thank you.
Chairman Reedy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that, it looks like Representative Freeman would like to speak on this as well.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, sponsor, for bringing this legislation. I just want to echo a lot of the comments that were just made. Those of you that didn't see photos or didn't have an opportunity to visit Waverly, it's really tough to understand the scope of the damage that was there. But the thing that really warmed my heart was when we were there dropping off supplies, they had too many supplies. They had too many cans of food, too many old sets of shoes for people to wear. So Tennessee really made good on the name, the volunteer state, and really stepped up. So thank you again, sponsor, for bringing something that both recognizes the disaster, but also recognizes the great work that people around our state did.
Representative Sparks.
Yes, I just wanted to mention there's a reason Jay Reedy didn't read that resolution. He knew he couldn't hold back being choked up. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Jay. But I wanted to thank Channel 5 WTVF. There was a reporter, I'm hoping I pronounced her name right, journalist Sina Sleem, for covering some of the volunteer efforts and asking for volunteers over there. I think it's a Tony Vanella with a group called Inspiritus, asking volunteers and pleading for volunteers. Senator Kerry Roberts is, I guess, riding his bike 100 miles across those counties to help raise awareness and raise funds. So thank you, Representative Reedy, for bringing awareness, and sorry for the victims out there.
Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, and I just like, me and several of my colleagues went down there and we took several loads of supplies. I just want to specifically thank the Home Depot Corporation, especially the management and people at the Bellevue Home Depot. We walked in there and they said, well, we're going to get you guys a grant. And they made sure we got X number of supplies, and then they doubled that. So I appreciate all the Home Depot Corporation did to assist in this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of House Joint Resolution 7, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Garrett, aye. Bricken, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays.
House Joint Resolution 7, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 77 by Chairman Zachary, Speaker Sexton, and others relative to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that we roll this 2 spaces.
Without objection, roll 2 spaces. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 76 by Chairman Vaughn, Speaker Sexton, and others relative to public health.
Chairman Vaughn, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 76 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of the amendment, and I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, House Amendment 2 by Representative Hardaway. Mr. Speaker, was untimely filed. And as a reminder to the body, untimely filed amendments, the sponsor is allowed a 1-minute explanation.
Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. The amendment simply brings the control of critical decisions back to the local folks. That's as plain and simple as I can put it. The local legislative bodies need to be the determiners of what it is that's in the best interest of the constituents in that county. I think we've gone way too far, too many times, in trying to dictate the details of what is in the best interest of our local folks. There's a reason that we have local government. because they're closer to the people and they know the problems. They can solve the problems much better than we can, hundreds of miles away in some instances. Thank you for your consideration.
You've heard the motion. The amendment was not timely. So we are voting on consideration of amendment number 2. All those in favor of considering amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 24, 69 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 2 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my good friend and colleague from Shelby County. I appreciate the sentiment that that amendment was offered in, because local control actually is one of the origins of this bill. Our local duly elected school board was trying to place the proper restrictions within our educational facilities in Collierville, but was overruled, and with a body that was making determinations in spite of them and in spite of statewide rules. So that's what the origin of this bill is. As I stand here today, we're looking at consolidating, and the two words here, consolidation and consistency, for extraordinary circumstances across our state. It does 3 primary things. Number 1 is it determines who gets to set quarantining guidelines if necessary throughout our state. That's who. So this bill sets forward that the Commissioner of Health is the sole source of quarantine guidelines throughout our state. It is also the sole quarantining guidelines for COVID-19. I think that's important, that this has to deal with the current pandemic that we're in. The next thing that it does is that it changes some wording in the statute in the title 682603. It talks about some of the requirements and responsibilities of local health departments. What this does, this adds a clause to one of those sentences, one of those points in that segment, and says that except during a declared state of emergency for a COVID-19 pandemic, and then the sentence carries on as it was before, rules and regulations as are necessary and appropriate to protect the general health and safety of the county. And then finally, we added some clarification to how the process of health department directors being chosen. We set forward a procedure of how the collaboration between the county mayor and the state health commissioner works whenever a new health department health officer is chosen. So, and then other than that, it amends language just so it refers to Section 1 and keeps everything else with county health departments the same. And with that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, sponsor. I just have one question. In the first section there, in the first sentence, it says the Commissioner of Health has the sole authority to determine quarantine guidelines for a person if the person tests positive for COVID-19. There are over 6.9 million Tennesseans, according to the latest census. How is the Commissioner of Health going to have the capacity to determine the quarantine status for every individual in the state of Tennessee?
Chairman Vaughn.
Representative, I believe that I know that the Commissioner of Health didn't call me and say, "Hey, Kevin, how you feeling? I think you need to stay at home today." But due to the infectious nature of this, and as they are tracking data, then I would assume then that it's not on an individual basis, but that's who qualifies for being quarantined. And so I think you get the gist.
Representative Clemens.
Okay, I obviously just have a concern with how it's written and the actual logistical impact of that. So thanks for entering the question. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chairman Vaughn, thank you for bringing the legislation. As a representative from Knox County, I know one of our frustrations throughout this has been the inconsistency throughout the state. We have 89 counties that have operated with consistency, and Tennesseans knew what to expect in those 89 counties. But then you had 6 other counties with independent health departments that literally marched to the beat of their own drum. And so we had metro areas throughout our state where there was just inconsistency across the board in the response to COVID, and put an extreme burden on Tennesseans, and continues to do that today. So this piece of legislation only related to COVID-19 brings that consistency. And as a representative of Knox County, I appreciate you bringing the legislation.
Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, sir. And one of the, I use analogies from time to time because that's kind of how I think, and some are better than others, I will admit. But the analogy that I see in this is that our state has been fighting a battle with COVID-19, and we're trying to win this war with 1 general and 5 colonels that don't report to the general. And what this does is this brings, this will bring the consistency of a plan to where whenever residents who live very close to one county that is under state control versus one that's under a county control, they'll understand why they have to do certain things in different areas. That hopefully all the requirements will be the same, and we don't have to figure out where you are geographically to figure out what requirement for travel, whether it be for school quarantining, whether it be for any number of things. So, thank you.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. You had mentioned 3 bullet points. I didn't really get a good understanding of that bullet point number 2 when you were explaining it.
Chairman Vaughn.
Well, Representative, 68-609 reads, the county health officer is empowered to order the quarantine of any place or person if the county health officer finds that quarantine is necessary to protect the public health from an epidemic. The county health officer is empowered to order the closure of any public establishment, facility, or building if the county health officer finds unsanitary conditions of such a nature and extent to significantly threaten the public health. Those 2 items will still be in the code. The third is the county health officer is empowered to order the closure of any public establishment, facility, or building if the county health officer is otherwise authorized by law to take that action. Again, that stays in place. So here's the amendment. Hang with me, I'm getting to the change. What we're amending here is the county health officer is empowered to order, except during a declared state of emergency for a COVID-19 pandemic, rules and regulations as are necessary or appropriate to protect the general health and safety of the county. So what we're doing is we're taking that section, and it is only during this period that we're under executive orders for the COVID-19. Our committee yesterday had some discussions with regards to the previous languages. When does the pandemic start? When does it stop? That type of thing. And because there's any number of organizations that declare pandemics to begin or end, the way that we could have finite understanding of this was it's tied to the executive orders, emergency orders, or state of emergency declared by the governor.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Sponsor, for your explanation. With these changes, it begs the question, do we feel or think that those health department directors or those people that are at the local level, do they have the capacity to make decisions that are affecting their local communities? And it seems like we're pulling that power away from them to make those decisions. The Commissioner of Health, while she is the Commissioner of Health at the state level, does not reside in Shelby County. And you know, when this pandemic hit, Shelby County, which is now the safest county in the state of Tennessee per capita, it was taking a real hard hit of people dying, people contracting the virus. And we had our county health officials there on the ground, knowing what those numbers look like, knowing where the hot spots were, and making decisions pursuant to that. But now we're going to take that authority from ground zero and move it to the middle of the state, where these individuals are not necessarily on the ground themselves. I have to ask, we got this legislation here before us. Do we feel that are we running this legislation because we feel that our state just did not do a good job in mitigating the emergency in regards to the pandemic? Is that why we're running this legislation? Do we feel like the governor didn't do a good job? Why are we making these changes in bringing this stuff up here to state government, who state government hadn't did well in most things, education, pandemic, and so we're going to give them more power when it comes to the rest of this pandemic? What are we doing? Why are we doing this?
Chairman Vaughn.
We're adding consistency, and you know, I think that this isn't a performance review of any department, whether it be local or state, but I would say that it seems as if the state Commissioner of Health has done a fine job, as well as anyone could do, in 89 counties. So why 6 counties should not be treated the same is something that we're cleaning up the language on. And so I understand that our Commissioner of Health and our governor have been in constant contact. I know that the city of Memphis resources were deployed. So it's not as if the Commissioner of Health will be directing from here in Nashville without input from people who are locally on the ground and locally dealing with this on a daily basis. So what all this does is it merely makes sure that the rules and regulations of a Tennessean who lives in one county is going to be consistent with the rules and regulations that are applied to another county.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to your point, thank you for that explanation, Mr. Sponsor. To your point, I wonder if that consistency could have been achieved during the pandemic if just those decisions to be consistent were made. You know, ultimately the governor is the governor, and he could have made decisions to, you know, for the same rules to apply everywhere else. However, in the county that you and I live in, you know, things were different. Our situation was not the same as the other 89 counties that were dealing with the pandemic. In the beginning, there was not a big hit in the eastern part of the state as it was in Shelby County. So things had to be different. And we needed those individuals on the ground locally to help mitigate and help get through that emergency. That's why we had it that way. But the governor could have made a decision through an executive order or whatever. He could have made a decision for it to have a blanket application across the entire state. So is this bill an indictment on the governor and his lack of decision making? Is this why we're doing this? Because he could have made it. Am I correct? Or maybe I'm incorrect. Am I incorrect in that assertion, Mr. Sponsor? Could the governor have made through executive order, made a blanket decision for consistency across the state?
Chairman Vaughn.
It is my understanding that yes, he could, but at the same time, when there was not clear legislation within the code with regard to these home rule counties, then For whatever reason, he is the governor. He chose not to. You'll have to ask him that. This is certainly not an indictment on him from my part.
Representative Parkinson.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're on the record, so I'm sure he's listening. Maybe he'll send me something saying why he didn't do that. But I think he could have. And I honestly feel that, with all of this movement and things that are happening here, I think we're indicting the governor on saying there was a bad performance. And I don't agree with that necessarily, because Shelby County was allowed to make decisions. And right now, our COVID numbers are way, way down compared to everywhere else in the state. And so why are we adjusting? Why are we fixing something that's not broke? And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. I appreciate you.
Representative Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, I wanted to ask a couple of questions just for clarification. So within the body of this language, it mentions that a private business or school for purposes of closing the private business or restricting operation. Is this referring to a single business?
Chairman Vaughn.
Again, Chairman Todd, much like to my dear friend from Davidson County, this would give I cannot imagine a situation to where we would only be dealing with a single business. But what it does, I would assume that, yes, on a micro level, it probably could bear down to that. But in what we've learned from the pandemic, I don't see that as being a situation. But if, let's say, there was a facility that had gone through a terrible, there'd been a great number of cases contacted or traced back to that facility, this gives her the authority to do that. But it would only be the Commissioner of Health. It would not be your county commission. It would not be the mayor. It would be set forth by the Commissioner of Health, given all the data that would be required to do so.
Representative Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess to clarify what I'm asking, is this intended to be for individual businesses only and not some class of businesses? For example, are we intending for this to be, this business has an issue, we're going to close it temporarily, this business has an issue, versus all car washes have to close across the state, or all whatever, restaurants have to close across the state? I'm just asking for the intention of the legislation.
Chairman Vaughn.
The intention is to provide consistency and a single source of regulatory actions throughout the state, so that if, let's say that we found out that a car, I can't even contemplate a situation to where a whole class of businesses, I think that we could see something more along the lines of geographical differences than we would types of businesses or activities within a business. But again, that would be a decision based upon data that the Commissioner of Health would be reviewing and providing.
Representative Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess what I'm getting at is the concerns that many of our constituents have had for the last 18 months, and how for a period of time, many classes of businesses were closed, deemed unessential or non-essential. And that's what concerns me. I want to make sure that this is crafted in such a way that the department has the flexibility, the commissioner has the flexibility to close a certain situation, an individual business or location, and not a class of businesses like we saw happen. The other thing I wanted to address also is when the way the sentence reads, a private business or school. Does that mean a private business or private school? Is private to be describing both business and school, or only business?
Chairman Vaughn.
This would affect, I think that if we were trying to exclude private schools from it, then we would have only mentioned schools with LEAs. This obviously refers to that as well. And let me give you an example of why that is. Let's just look at history a little bit and what we've experienced. One of the governor's last executive orders removed the requirements for masking students in schools across the state. Yet in Shelby County, even though everywhere else had their mask mandates lifted, Shelby County doubled down and required masks, and not only required masks in public schools and public places, but also private schools, which I thought was a great overreach of their authority. And so that's what we're looking at here, and was the impetus for the change of the Section 4, where we added the clause in front of it, except in a COVID-19 pandemic. But with regards to the language of the quarantine issue, it is very clear that this legislation is not trying to inhibit containment methodologies used for COVID-19. Well, and for those who have fallen prey to the rhetoric that think that we're being reckless or careless or not watching science, we're not concerned about that. We've all known victims. Many of us have had it. Many of us have struggled. And so the serious nature of COVID-19 is not what we're here to debate. We're not here to cast any dispersions on what people try to do to mitigate it. What we're trying to do is provide a consistent means and methodologies for fighting this disease, while providing clarity to our citizens and answering to our citizens the reasoning behind what we're doing. And sometimes it's very confusing, particularly when I can drive on one side of one bridge and I don't have to wear a mask, and I can do whatever I want to do, but yet on another side of the bridge, I have to adhere to a different set of rules and guidelines, because viruses and bacteria, they don't know political subdivisions. And so what this does is this gives us the ability to consistently fight this disease with one voice, with one consistent set of actions and guidelines. And if the Department of Health believes that quarantining a business is the appropriate action to take, then I'm not trying to deter that in any shape, form, or fashion. And so I felt it's important for us to understand what is driving this, but we're trying to gain consistency for quarantining when we're in such a dire situation that quarantining is the appropriate method, as determined by people who are professionals in the area.
Representative Todd.
And I appreciate that clarification. I certainly agree with your concerns and what we need to do in this legislation, because we've all been experiencing this for so long now. But I still want to make sure that we're not continuing a situation where even a commissioner of health can close a set of private businesses across this state. If there's an outbreak at a certain location, a certain business, then okay, I understand that. But what we experienced was the closing by a lot of local decisions of swaths of businesses. People responded to the pandemic. They responded to accurate information. When we left here almost 18 months ago in March, folks, I mean, this place was like a ghost town, and there were no mandates. There were no official closures of anything when we left. But people responded. People retracted based on the information and the concern they had for their own personal safety. So if you give folks that kind of information, accurate information, consistent information, they will respond appropriately. So I just don't want to see a situation where we've got one authority that closes a whole swath of businesses. So that's why I'm asking for clarification, because it says a business in multiple places here. So I want to make sure we're referring to single businesses that the commissioner would address if those outbreaks occurred.
Chairman Vaughn.
I understand that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This does not quantify that, or does not delineate the set of circumstances, but it says that the closing of a business for quarantine purposes. It doesn't say a closing of 10 businesses. It doesn't say a closing of however, because everybody's business ownership is personal to them. You know, I appreciate my competitors and colleagues, but really my business is what feeds my family. So with this legislation, any quarantine has to be directed by the Commissioner of Health. There's not an intent, if you're wondering what the intent is, it's not to enable the determination or label of essential versus non-essential. That we're not addressing that, but what we are saying is that if a determination needs to be made about the quarantining of a business, this is how it's done. These are the standards that are put forward, and as well, it's going to be up to the Commissioner of Health. The other thing that I do want to say is that, let me read you one thing that I didn't read in there. I think this will give you some comfort. The Commissioner may only establish quarantine guidelines by rules promulgated pursuant to the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, compiled in Title IV, Chapter 5. So rules are going to be promulgated by the Joint Government Operations Committee dealing with the quarantining of businesses. So from that standpoint, issues that you've brought up, that would be the point at which that type of information is fleshed out.
Representative Stewart.
I just have a simple question. I mean, is there any metric where my county, Davidson County, hasn't done better with COVID than the state as a whole? I mean, what is it that was done in Davidson County that affected any aspect of COVID response that was less effective than the state as a whole, such that we now have to step in and substitute our judgment for that of the health board here?
Chairman Vaughn.
Well, Representative, I'm not a medical expert. Frankly, I was pre-med for one semester. But I do know my fair share of mathematics. And when you look at the data, the curves showing the case count, caseload, everything else, they're remarkably similar from all parts of the state. They may lag a little bit in time, much to my colleague from Shelby County brought out. Shelby County went first and had about a 2-week jump, maybe 3 weeks, as a rise due to the Delta variant over the rest of the state. And hence, as the slope of the curve is turning down, they're now ahead of the state in recovery. This is not an indictment against the performance of Davidson County. It's not an indictment of any official. And I understand that I struggle, though, wondering why requirements for Cheatham County are different than Davidson, though. I drive through Cheatham, and why should I be undergoing rules that are not consistent with Davidson there, or as I come through Dixon, or any number of counties as I drive through the state? This is just merely an attempt to get everything consistent, and so that we know we don't have to check what physical location we're in on what our behavior or what constraints we may be expecting when we get there.
Representative Stewart.
Yeah, that wasn't my question. My question, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to identify a single aspect of COVID response that the Davidson County Health Board did worse than the state as a whole. And as we know, Davidson County is different from other counties in the state. Some counties are more urban, some counties are more rural. They have different needs, they have different challenges. We have all sorts of laws. We have all sorts of instances in which local governments are more suited to make policy. I thought based on your law, there must be some evidence somewhere that suggests that Davidson County or Shelby County, that these boards of health have not done a good job. But I look and I find by every metric they've done a better job. than the state as a whole. I mean, take vaccination rates, which every scientist in the world recognizes essential to COVID response. You know, Davidson County has a 63% vaccination rate as opposed to the state, which is well under 50%. So here we've got a higher performing body. Why are we trying to handcuff them? And is there any actual specific factual information that supports this bill? I just wanted to give you the opportunity to articulate it now, because we're hearing all this vague stuff about I'm traveling and I'm, worried about being imposed upon by a local official. I just want to know, is there a number somewhere in the world that would justify this bill, a scientific statement, some study? Is there anywhere that the Shelby County Board of Health or the Davidson County Board of Health didn't outperform the state? If there is, let us know what that is.
Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm surprised, though, speaking of the Davidson County Board of Health, that they've only got a 63% vaccination rate among their members, because I would have thought that they would have had more, because I'm not sure that their health department is mandating vaccination for an entire county, or either that must have been some vagary that didn't apply to what this bill deals with. So I'm somewhat surprised by that. I might need it clarified, but this has nothing to do with vaccination, which, by the way, I fully support. I hope everybody out there, after consulting with your medical team, if you feel needed to be vaccinated, I encourage you to do so. So from that standpoint, this isn't about vaccination. This is about the administration of rules and regulations imposed upon communities and why it should be different for one set than another. This is about consistency.
Representative Stewart.
Well, I wrap this up. You're just wrong. Actually, vaccination rates, and I just look for any statistic. I gave you the opportunity to pick your own, and I still haven't heard any basis in fact justifying the state superimposing its healthcare authority over these boards that have done such a good job. That was just my choice. But as you know, vaccination, since you asked, that's just one of the many areas where our health departments have excelled in terms of promoting and facilitating this. And my point was, I was just looking because you chose not to give me any particular information. Anyway, I've given you 3 chances. I haven't heard a single factual statement from you that would justify interfering with these health boards, which at every level outperformed the State Department of Health. We need to keep these boards. Restricting them is putting politics over the health and safety of our people. Hardly something new, but it's bad policy, and this is a bad bill.
Out of order. Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield? Thank you, sir. In section 15, where we're giving immunity for civil liability for COVID, how is this different than what we did last year in a special session on COVID immunity? Why are we restating what we did last year?
Chairman Vaughn.
I don't think we address immunity in this bill, Representative. You're on House Bill 76, and the amendment code is 010338.
Representative Beck.
I stand corrected. I withdraw my question. Thank you.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Exactly.
You are my representative, which you yield.
Yes, sir. Just this time, though, since you cut me so deep yesterday.
I won't cut you deep today. I will not cut you deep today. I've heard the conversation, but I'm still trying to wrap myself around the idea of how do we effectively, across the whole state of Tennessee, given the nature of this virus and how it has affected many communities in different ways. And most of the time, the end results has been death. How do we uniformly have one person to make that call and be at our safest in terms of getting away from catching the virus?
Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You bring up a great point, Representative Shaw, because, and I'll touch on it again, is that no one expects for the Commissioner of Health to operate in a vacuum. I don't think that she's done that. She's been in contact with a number of these communities, seeks information from them. Just because we're advocating for the decision to come from her office doesn't mean that the decision that she chooses will be uniform across the state. It could be that some areas need different treatment, and if that's the case, then that would be the decision for hers to make. And so from that standpoint, what we're trying to do is have a consistent plan for all parts of the state, because again, germs don't travel or don't respect lines. If we have an authority to go to in this matter, then that understands what's happening all across the state and all the different varying conditions that may apply, then a unified approach to resolving and mitigating the problems is what I personally feel is the way to go. As opposed, again, to the analogy of one general and 5 colonels, and they're not talking, or they don't have to necessarily follow each other's guidelines. I think we need one general for the entire state.
Representative Shaw.
I get that, but I'm looking at the nature of the virus and how it has rampantly moved across this, not just Tennessee, but this whole United States. And that in many cases, there's no time to make a phone call. There's no time to decide if the commissioner or whoever's in charge can give an executive order. I just don't see how we hem it up to. I understand what you're doing, and I think I know why, but I don't see how we do that effectively without having some local authority at the moment to make a decision about what needs to be done. And along the lines of my colleague about the closing the businesses, are we at a point where every business in town needs to close, or are we at a point where only Shaw's Broadcasting down the street need to close? That is what I can't get my arms wrapped around in terms of what your legislation is doing. So I believe you mean well. I think you want to do the right thing, but I'm just not for sure the way this is drafted, it's going to do the right thing in terms of what we want to do. I just want to say that. If you could come in, I'd appreciate it.
Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, sir. With regards to the quarantining, what this will give you at Shaw Broadcasting the assurance is that you won't have a county mayor, you won't have a city mayor, you won't have a county commission, you will not have a city council close Shaw's Broadcasting. They won't pass an ordinance that says that you have to be quarantined for COVID-19. What it does is it says that all that authority rests solely to set the guidelines after input from legislative bodies why that business would be closed. With regards to the other and the ability to handle situations, again, we're asking that we raise the 89. They're already doing this for 89 counties. We're asking for that number to change to 95. That's what we're doing with this bill. So I understand. I understand people's arguments. I understand their positions and their points of view and the constituencies that they must serve. But this is the bill that we've brought forward today because in my estimation this is the way that things should go, and we'll have an opportunity for other folks to register whether they agree with it or not.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection to the question? All right, well. We'll be on the board. There's objection to the previous question. We're voting on previous question. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 69, 23 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting on House Bill 76 as amended. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 67, 23 nays, 2 present, not voting.
House Bill 76, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 77 by Chairman Zachary.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I again request that we roll this 2 spaces.
Without objection, roll 2 spaces. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 72 by Chairman Sapicki, Speaker Sexton, and others relative to partisan elections for school board members.
Chairman Spicky, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 72 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Spicky moves passage, properly second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Elections Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Moon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Chairman Moon moves adoption amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt amendment number 1. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, House Amendment 2 by Representative Mitchell. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed. The sponsors allowed a 1-minute explanation.
Representative Mitchell, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for consideration of amendment number 2. In doing so, the goal of having nonpartisan elections is not to remove all politics from governing, but rather to remove a conflict point that keeps the school board from doing its job. It comes down to conflict. Conflict on a governing board is productive when it leads to informed debate and reasoned decision-making. Conflict is destructive when it becomes entrenched or predictable regardless of the issue being discussed. To return to the topic of mass policy, a productive debate would focus on disagreements regarding risk calculation and mask mandates for schools, while a destructive debate would be used for making masking policy just another symbol of our cultural and political divides. Compromise becomes impossible when every substantive debate becomes into a partisan bickering match.
All right, that was the 1 minute. You've heard the motion. We are voting for consideration of amendment number 2. All those in favor of considering amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 21, 67 nays, 1 present, not voting.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 2 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 3 by Representative Miller. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will move for consideration of amendment number 3. Mr. Speaker, and I say to the members of this body, a question. Do you not think that we are partisan enough? Everything, not just in this body, in this nation. Now what we want to do is to make education partisan? Think about that. How asinine, how ridiculous does that even sound? We want to make education in this state partisan. Why would you want to do that? I'm going to withdraw this because I'm not going to subject myself to being denied because of this issue. I'm going to withdraw this amendment. But think about that as we vote for this bill. Why would we want to?
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. Amendment 3 is by Representative McKenzie. Amendment 4 is Representative Miller.
Representative Miller, after that stunning 1-minute speech, would you like to withdraw amendment number 4 or you want another chance?
I would like another chance. I'm just going to
Another chance? All right. Representative McKenzie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will make a motion for consideration of Amendment 3 by myself. And, you know, there's a myriad of things that's just flat wrong about this. One, we shouldn't even be hearing it at this point. It's totally out of order. But also, when we're talking about a school board, I remember, I guess, Senator Baker at the time, when he talks about of any of the positions that he was elected, he really regretted that he didn't have an opportunity to serve for school board, because that was the purest form of just doing one thing and one thing only. And that's focused on the kids, not this club or that club chirping in your ear on these radical extreme aspects on both sides. So this is just wrong. And also it's going to start restricting another part of our of our constituency. There are going to be some employees that's not going to allow it partisan.
You have heard the motion. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 3. All those in favor of considering amendment number 3, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Whitson, no. Ms. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 22, 67 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 3 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, now we are ready for Representative Miller. Amendment 4 by Representative Miller, it was not timely filed.
Representative Miller, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to withdraw and I'll speak on the bill. Thank you.
Without objection, amendment number 4 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 5 by Representative Sapicki. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Sapicki, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, this is the amendment that changes this bill from the must position it's in to a may position that it will be in. This aligns with what the Senate is trying to do. So that's all it does. The only change in the bill is from must to may. It makes it a permissive bill to our local entities. They can choose whether or not to do this or not. That's what the bill is, Mr. Speaker. Move to consider.
You've heard the motion. We are voting for consideration of amendment number 5. All those in favor of considering amendment number 5 when the bell rings, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Carr, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 66, 19 nay, 3 present, not voting.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having received the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 5 prevails. Representative Sapicki, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move to adopt Amendment 5.
Representative Sapicki moves to adopt amendment number 5. Any objection to the question? All those in favor of adopting amendment number 5, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 66, 20 nay, one present, not voting.
Amendment number 5 prevails. We've adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 6 by Representative Hardaway. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. Wasn't timely filed, but it's a timely amendment. Shelby County, most of our school boards don't want to be in this foolishness. We believe that there's a way to educate our children. We know the values that are set out by the candidates. We don't need anybody mandating how we run our elections and putting that unfunded mandate on us. And I thank you for consideration. Please vote in the affirmative.
You have heard the motion. We are voting for consideration of amendment number 6. All those in favor of considering amendment number 6, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 24, 67 nays, one present, not voting.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 6 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Spicky, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Spicky renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the sponsor, just a couple of questions. Have you heard from school boards individually and from the School Board Association on their support or opposition on this bill?
Chairman Spicky.
No.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. Have you sought their opinions?
Chairman Spicky.
Yes. Yes.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And have you found any school boards who support this bill?
Chairman Spicky.
Yes.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are we giving them a tool to use that they didn't have at first? Aren't they capable of running partisan school board elections now? Isn't that up to the parties, the Republican and the Democratic county parties?
Chairman Spicky.
No.
Representative Hardaway.
Are you saying it's in statute that it's forbidden for county parties to designate candidates or endorse candidates for school board?
Chairman Spicky.
Currently, I understand is yes, that is correct. This bill is permissive, which will add this to the already list of those positions that a local party could partisan, such as mayor, county commission, trustee, road superintendent, sheriff. This would just be a permissive bill that now would include school board members.
Representative Hardaway.
Let me be a little clearer, because we've seen this in other cases where the individual parties may choose to or not to run a primary. However, a party may choose to simply endorse a slate of candidates. So aren't they capable of doing that now with the school boards?
Chairman Spicky.
This bill that I'm running today addresses the ability for somebody to be recognized on the ballot, in the ballot box, as a R, a D, or an I.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And the reason is that the R values and the D values would be consistent and cookie cutter, no matter who the candidate?
Chairman Spicky.
No, sir. There are 99 members here who have different parts of the Democrat and Republican Party that they believe in, but they identify as a Democrat and Republican, which means when your voters go to the voter booth, if they have a D, an I, or an R, and they haven't had the opportunity to meet that person running for the school board, it would give them some kind of comfort to understand what values that those candidates may possibly represent in votes on the school board, therefore providing better transparency and better information to the voter instead of possibly this information being suppressed.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'll wrap up. I'm not going to run my friend through too many more questions, but I think it's unique that we would be discussing transparency during a extraordinary session when this bill, as well as others, had no transparency. Most of the folks who are looking at this now haven't seen the final language, never will have an opportunity for input on this. So the transparency argument, I don't think it's relevant. But when it comes to individuals who are offering themselves for office, some way, somehow, they find a way, the successful ones find a way to identify their values for the voters. And I dare say the more individual the individuals are, the more likely we are to come up here on Capitol Hill or go into the school board or go into the city council or the county commission and make decisions in the best interest of the constituents, in the best interest of the public, as opposed to partisan politics. I strongly oppose putting our children, our babies, in the middle of partisan politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sponsor, for indulging.
Chairman speaking. Anything? Representative Ogles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is not a question, just more of a statement. I just sincerely hope with this process we don't turn these elections into exactly what some of my colleagues have said. I will support this piece of legislation because there's parts of it I think are good. However, you know, there's a couple places where we've always not really talked about politics. One was the dinner table, church, and a lot of times it's been at school as well. I just hope this process does not in some way ruin that. And I sincerely hope that these candidates have education at heart. I hope they're teachers. I hope they're parents. I hope they're people that have a background in education and the best well-being of those students at heart. And this does not turn into a platform for a political office down the road. Thank you.
Representative Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and sponsor of the bill. I appreciate you bringing this bill. Just a question to ask. I have a number of people back home in the 43rd District and across the state of Tennessee that has contacted me and asked me about superintendent of schools, about the opportunity to elect their superintendent of school instead of appointing their superintendent of school. My question is, will this affect the bill that I'm carrying that far as having the opportunity to present a bill that we'd have an option in the state of Tennessee to bring a bill where our superintendent of schools could be elected or they could continue being appointed? And we have a lot of good superintendent schools, but we have problems with some superintendents. So I'm just asking you that, would this affect this? And we want to give our people back the freedom in the state of Tennessee that they want the opportunity to elect instead of being appointed. So just ask that question.
Chairman Spicky.
Representative, there's nothing in this bill that would affect that legislation going forward.
All right. Next up, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very brief case. Again, I would just say to my members that I've been here long enough, and usually I'm not surprised too much anymore about the kind of legislation that comes through this body. But at some point, we should protect. We should have some sense of purity. Let's protect our system of education. It's been said much better than I can say it by other members. At what point in time will we stop making things so partisan in this General Assembly? What are we going to do next? And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if someone comes up with the idea that we're going to decide if Jesus or God is a Democrat or Republican. I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see that coming from this legislature. Let's protect something. I would even ask the sponsor, withdraw this thing, man. Come on. What do you want to do here? Why are you even considering you want to make education a partisan issue? Right now, we're dealing with this whole issue of critical race theory. It's an issue in this country, one that I can pretty much understand why. But that's what I think about when I think about this legislation you're proposing here. Making our local school boards having to run as a Democrat, as a Republican, because what you're really saying, Republican education is better than Democratic education, or vice versa. And I totally disagree with that. Or independent education. I totally disagree with that. This is bad. This is not good. And I hope we vote against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman speaking.
Members, I want to make sure we are clear about what we're considering right now, because what was just said is inaccurate. This bill, and let me tell you exactly what this bill does, and this is exactly what you're considering. This bill simply adds school board members to those elected positions already allowed to have partisan races at the local level, if the local party so decides. So the local party in each one of your counties will decide whether they want to do this or not. It is their control. All we're doing is allowing this other opportunity. It is a permissive bill that gives local political parties local control over their local elected races. If a party does not want to participate, they do not have to be involved. But most importantly, this legislation will bring greater transparency to the ballot box for people when they go to vote for school board members, like they would be going if it was a partisan election. They would have greater knowledge of a county mayor, a county commission. But the thing that everybody seems to neglect here, that I'm hearing from certain groups over here, is the importance that school board plays in the future of Tennessee. I didn't broach the subject with critical race theory, but it's been brought up. That, among other things, have brought politics into our classrooms. And the people that decide that are at the local level, those school board members in supplemental material that is adopted or unadopted at the local level. All we're trying to do here is provide greater transparency for those voters when they go to the voters box, that they can hopefully identify with somebody if otherwise everybody's running undeclared. And if you don't know any of those people running undeclared, you have no idea what values or beliefs those people have. And this is a bill that's going to try to provide greater transparency and greater information for those people running for school board. Only if the local party wants to do it. And if one party wants to do it and the other party doesn't want to do it, that other party doesn't have to. It is a very permissive bill. We're not rewriting the rules here. We're just adding another layer of transparency. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to express my concerns about this legislation. I think by doing this that we are implementing or putting in place another hurdle for potential school board candidates to cross. It's difficult. I think we all want good school board members. That's all our desire, because good school board members are going to make for good schools. But when we do a partisan election, then that requires those folks to not only deal with the general election, raising money for that, but also a primary. The last school board election in my county cost over $40,000 per candidate. That's a lot of money, and that was just in a general election. So you add a primary to that, and if we want young parents who have the most at stake in the schools to be a part of that school board, then we're, again, putting another hurdle in front of them. They're the ones with limited time. They have young children at home. They have a job. They probably have limited resources, again, because they're young in their careers and they have children to take care of. So my concern is just that we would be closing the door to potentially good candidates who would be out there who could bring a lot to the discussion of the school board. I think it's even more important because we have seen across our state and across the country how difficult some school board meetings are. It's going to be harder and harder to get good candidates to even consider running. And when we add the partisanship piece to it, I think that further limits the pool of good candidates. For that reason, I can't support this bill. Thank you.
Out of order. Representative Cochran. Sorry, Chairman Spicky.
Just to clarify the last statement made, when you declare a partisan election locally, there's no prohibition on someone running as an independent. There is no prohibition on that. So you could have possibly a D, an R, and an I. And then the way the locals work, they have the option to do either a caucus or a convention. Some counties across the state have been doing caucuses and convention where they just have it locally and the candidates come in who want to run. It's all held in-house, and then they are put on the general election ballot. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the sponsor as well. This is a very good piece of legislation, and so members, there's a saying that we use up here a lot, especially when we are celebrating the victories of Tennessee, whether we've passed another balanced budget or brought thousands of jobs to Tennessee. There's a statement that we use a lot, and it matters who governs. We say it all the time when we're celebrating our victories here. And ultimately what we mean by that is a public official's philosophy of government matters. That's a universal principle. It matters here. It matters at the local school board. It matters on the county commission. That is an absolute universal principle. You know, some try to argue that school boards are somehow apolitical because they don't have an R or a D beside their names. That's nonsense. Every year, right now, we receive countless resolutions from school boards across the state asking us to vote in favor or in opposition to any number of issues. That's political activity already. Beyond that, at a local level, school spending, I mean, in McMinn County is anywhere, around 70%. I'm sure in most counties between 50 and 80% of your budget. When you have a body making a decision over that large of an amount of your taxpayer funds, that's a political position. And their philosophy of government matters. It matters when they're making financial decisions. It matters when they're making decisions, we know now for sure, on curriculum and on student codes of conduct. We know that that's political. The politics are already there. This is just shedding light on what politics are there.
Out of order.
And so I'll just say it again. It matters who governs. We say it all the time. How you vote on this and how we vote on this will reveal to our constituents, do we actually believe that or do we just say it? I'm in support of your legislation. Thank you very much.
Representative Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in my district, we really don't, to my knowledge, have any problem with our school boards currently. And I was asked a question recently that I would like to try to get you to clear up for me. One of my really good school board members, in fact, chairman of the school board in one of my counties, works for the federal government in Huntsville, Alabama. And he's concerned that if we pass this bill setting up partisan elections, that he will not be able to participate, to run, or to support, or anything if we do this. And so I would just like to, I think we have a lot of districts that have a lot of federal workers in Oak Ridge and in Nashville and Fort Campbell and a lot of places that we might be banning a lot of good candidates that are already school board members or want to be in the future. So I'd just like to ask, would that prohibit federal employees from running in partisan elections?
Chairman speaking.
To answer your question, according to the Hatch Act, as I've been instructed, if it is a partisan election and that person is a federal employee, they are prohibited from being able to run in that election. However, I don't know if your county has partisan elections to begin with, because this bill is now permissive. If they choose not to have the partisan election, he's not affected at all.
Representative Stewart.
My question is simple. Which paragraph of the special call does your bill fall under, do you think?
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, item 4 in the petition, the last sentence says, and to address partisan elections of school board members.
Representative Stewart.
Well, I see the language, Mr. Clerk, so I'll have to give you that one. I guess you had that covered.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to, just on behalf of Hamilton County, I know that our #1 budget item in Hamilton County is education. The #1 budget item in the state of Tennessee is education. And since our colleague did bring up critical race theory, since we are seeing parents being labeled as domestic terrorists, as we are seeing some of these more inflammatory issues being brought forward, it's important to understand what the ideology is of those individuals appropriating that money. How we govern in this state and appropriate money for education is we turn that over to the LEA. And it is important to know the ideology of those individuals. And just as a parting thought, you know, when I hear all this rhetoric about nonpartisan elections, that's wonderful. It really is. But in reality, we do have to stake a claim and make a stand. And I want to ask the sponsor of the bill, instead of, did you speak with the school board members, did you speak with parents? Who are parents the one that are pushing this for this piece of legislation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman speaking.
With the issues that we've been having across the state with school boards, and I think what happened was, with our students being sent home, moms and dads were sitting in their homes listening to what our children were being taught. And the Great Awakening took place. And we saw that played out in our school boards across our state, and now you're seeing across the country, to where parents are sitting there saying, how is this being taught to our children? I thought I knew who you were. And the lack of transparency in our school boards right now of who's running for office, the groundswell came from the parents of this state. And then it just kept building and building, and we're seeing this in school boards across the state of a disconnect between those who are sitting on the school board and the people that elect them. And the one thing that our job, I believe, is to provide as much transparency in the voters' box as we can, so that people have a good idea and a level of expectation of performance from the people that they send to represent them. Just like we all sit here, our constituents have a level of expectation as to how we are going to perform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, sponsor. I just want to point out that there's a difference in being political and partisan. I think the point was made earlier incorrectly that we're arguing that school boards are not political. I don't think anybody's arguing that. I think we're arguing that partisanship is going to have an adverse impact on individuals who are willing to serve the people and the children of this state on school boards not being able to or not being willing to because you want to pigeon them into a hole. Also, with regards to the sponsor's last answer to that question, the state establishes the curriculum in classrooms. The state chooses the textbooks that our children use, not school boards. That answer is bogus. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just ask that you vote against this. We're going to have a chilling effect on those willing to enter public service. It's going to impact the quality of those who are willing to serve. And in turn, it is going to have a direct negative impact on schools across the state of Tennessee that will harm our children and the future workforce of this state, in which corporations are willing to move here and invest a large sum of dollars for a well-educated workforce. You start making everything about partisanship, it's going to have a direct impact on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman speaking.
Let me just clarify a statement that was made there that was a partial truth. State law says that your local LEAs have to adopt an approved textbook and adopt an approved curriculum, but there's nothing that says they have to purchase it. There are school systems across the state right now that look for supplemental material to fill those voids, and the people that make those decisions are the school board members. That's very important, that school board members have the ability to determine exactly what textbooks and curriculum that they're going to purchase winds up in our classrooms across Tennessee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous been questioned, been called. Any objection? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. All right. We are voting on previous question. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 65, 26 nay, one present, not voted.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of House Bill 72 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 52, 39 nays, two present, not voted.
House Bill 72, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the House back to item 1, House Bill 77 by Chairman Zachary.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that we roll this to the Hill.
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's item 5, House Bill 73 by Chairman Bricken and others relative to public funds.
Chairman Bricken, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for passage of House Bill 73 on third and final consideration.
Representative Bricken moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Bricken, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to bring this non-controversial bill before this body today. Over the next several years, the state of Tennessee, the counties and municipalities of our state will probably get up to $4 billion in federal rescue funds coming into the state. These counties, municipalities need a place to safely park their money while those projects are in place. This bill is brought to us by the leadership and the treasurer of the state of Tennessee. It basically reduces the collateral requirements for qualified banks from 100% collateral down to 90% and allows banks to pledge cash or like cash to secure those deposits. So it really just is going to give the banking community the willingness to accept these large influx of money into the system. So it's good for Tennessee. If you have a bank in your district or a friend of a bank, I would encourage you to sign on as co-sponsor to this bill. And for that, I'll renew my motion.
Representative Bricken renews his motion. Any discussion on this non-controversial bill? It looks like we do. Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. And here are some non-controversial comments. I thank the sponsor for the bill. What it does is make it possible for some of our banks to do business or more business with the state of Tennessee. And that will also allow for inclusivity and diversity in the state's business relationships. So I thank the sponsor for the bill. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. No, sir. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 73, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? There we go. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays.
House Bill 73, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 75 by Chairman Curcio and others relative to executive actions by the governor under the governor's emergency powers.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 75 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Curcio moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Curcio renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. Mr. Sponsor, can you tell us what the bill does? There's a lot of people that weren't in committee with us to hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, be happy to. So, members, what all this bill does, a lot of folks thought it was a caption bill. Right now, an executive order lives for 60 days before it has to be renewed. This simply changes that time frame from 60 days down to 45 days. We got a lot of folks, especially in my district, I'm sure across the state, who were subject to various executive orders where maybe their business was mandated to be closed. The circumstances changed very, very quickly during that 60-day period, yet the executive order was not looked at again. And so this would just seek to sort of, tighten that timetable. I think we've all seen how, as we're following the science and as numbers are going down, unfortunately, we're slow to react as government sometimes. And so we're slow to unwind some restrictions and things that we put up. So shortening that from 60 days down to 45 days would just make us a little more nimble as state government.
Hey, members, if you can keep the tone down a little bit. I know a representative couldn't hear the answers to the question. Chairman Curcio, you want to do a brief summary of that? And we'll try to turn up the volume a little bit too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. What this would do is take the length that an executive order lives from 60 days back to 45 days. And the idea is to make us a little bit more nimble so that we can respond to the facts on the ground instead of just letting that live on for 60 days.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, who's in charge of reviewing executive orders and shutting them down?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would be the executive that issued them, so the governor.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so we're shortening the window for an executive order to end, but am I correct? Right now, under statute, the governor could have ended the executive orders before they were to expire anyway, correct?
Chairman Curcio.
That is correct, and it's a point well made, but human nature being what it is, you just kind of a lot of times you'll automatically let that clock run out. And so this is kind of a forced review at 45 days instead of 60 days.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. So we're bringing this bill because the governor wasn't shutting the executive orders down fast enough for your constituents?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, this is not directed at, I think our governor's done an excellent job, the best in the country, quite frankly, throughout all of this. But this is just an acknowledgement that state government needs to be a little bit more nimble. We can relook at these things at 45 instead of 60.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. State government needs to be more nimble. The person that's in charge of being more nimble on the executive orders is the governor. So I'm listening to what you're not saying. Apparently, the governor didn't do it fast enough or we wouldn't be bringing this bill. But the governor has the ability to end these executive orders faster or we wouldn't be bringing this bill. Why don't we just ask the governor, hey, governor, why don't you just end those executive orders faster?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, these are powers that we gifted to the governor in this section of code, and we get to control how it reads. So that's simply what we're doing.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sponsor, for bringing this legislation. My question is this. There's nothing in this bill that would require action by the General Assembly if the governor intends to simply renew the executive orders indefinitely or a number of times. Is that correct?
Chairman Curcio.
Yes, sir, that is correct. It's a very simple bill. It just changes 60 down to 45. We have considered other legislation in this body that was successful that would do some of what you're describing. We've already passed that, but this is a simpler bill that just goes from 60 to 45.
Representative Griffin.
Thank you for the sponsor for doing that. And members, while it's not included in this bill, I would urge us to consider legislation that would require action by this body should this issue come up again. And it's not related to Governor Lee. I think Governor Lee's done a great job with the pandemic. My concern is future governors who may not be a Governor Lee. So I would simply do that, but I will support this bill. Thank you for bringing it.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This may or may not be germane to the issue before us, but normally by the time of session, the temperature has risen in here through our voices. Mr. Speaker, it's cold where we're sitting here, and wondered if maybe we could get a little bit of a temperature raise in the building. I was going to call for the question, but that may not be appropriate at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We will check with General Services on that request. Any further discussion? Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the sponsor, just for clarity, after 45 days, the governor still has the right to renew that EO. Is that correct?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly correct. Changing nothing else in the code, just changing 60 to 45 days, but the governor could renew, I think an unlimited number of times.
Thank you.
Representative Howe. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 75, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 76, 14 nays.
House Bill 75 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 71 by Representative Campbell relative to District Attorney General preemptorily refusing to prosecute all instances of a criminal offense without regard to facts or circumstances.
Representative Campbell, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, several members have informed me that they're cold in the chamber. I know some of them are cold by nature, but I just wanted to relay that. I'd like to roll this bill 3 spaces, please.
Without objection, roll 3 spaces. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 74 by Representative Garrett and others relative to executive actions regarding emergencies.
Chairman Garrett, at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to lay this on the table.
Without objection, lay it on the table.
I rephrase. I move a motion to lay it on the desk.
Hold.
Hold on the desk.
Hold.
Hold on the desk.
Without objection, the bill will be held on the desk. One moment, we're clearing up some stuff. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, as I anticipate that the House is about to break, the schedule for the rest of the day, in room 1 at 2:30, Finance, Ways and Means will meet. That's 2:30, room 1, Finance, Ways and Means. Calendar and Rules, room 1, immediately following. And I anticipate that there will be a recess motion until 3:30.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bill 70 be heard in Finance, Ways and Means Committee today.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objections, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until 3:30 today.
Without objection, House in recess till 3:30.